Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Blackhat Europe Arsenal talk on offensive security tools. This is a year in review with the C2 Matrix. I am George Orchias. I am now the Chief Technology Officer at Scythe and one of the co-creators of the C2 Matrix. Prior to joining Scythe, I worked at Citi for 10 years running the offensive security team, as well as teaching for SANS for about 10 years, mostly the offensive security courses.
That is 2019 Bryson that you're seeing, and this is 2020 Bryson. I am the founder of Grim, the founder of Scythe, and the co-founder of the ICS Village, as well as one of the co-creators of the C2 Matrix.
And I'm Adam Ashinchi, also one of the co-creators of the C2 Matrix. I'm also the VP of product over here at Scythe. I'm also involved in the Red Team Village and with Grey Hat. And as you can probably glean from from our facial hair, we're kind of the many stages of employment at Scythe right now, with Bryson having been here the longest, and George being one of the more new staff members. So yeah, but welcome to the presentation.
Excellent. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about command and control, right? Of course, we had to put a little bit of MITRE ATT&CK, because what is a presentation in 2020 without MITRE ATT&CK, right? Adversary, tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. And on the top there, you see the list of all the tactics, and command and control is one of them. It's a pretty important one. It is how you communicate between the systems that you compromise and issue commands so that you can control the systems that you have. See, without communication to your compromised host, you don't have any control, which means you have to write a worm. And we know how that goes, right? So command and control, I would argue, and I'm a little biased, that it is the most important tactic in MITRE ATT&CK. So how does it work? And what is a command and control framework? Well, on the right side, we have a command and control server. There's a whole lot of these, and that's what we're going to talk about. Most of these are frameworks that allow you to do and grab some sort of communication from the target system, that being our victim over there, lonely little Windows 10 machine there. It runs some sort of payload, and it connects to the command and control server. From the command and control server, then we can issue commands and have it do what we need it to do. And this is the important part, right? Especially for the red teamers and the pen testers, you need to have some sort of control onto that system you gained access to then actually gain action on your objectives and provide business value. So how did this all start? Long time ago, which feels like 8 years in COVID time, February 2019, SANS asked me to rewrite the 2-day Red Team exercise and adversary emulation course. This was a 2-course originally written by Joe Vest, and it was an excellent course, but Joe was moving on. So I took over, started writing it. And when you do a Red Team course, you need to have tools and labs to test out what you're teaching. So I chose PowerShell Empire. I'm sure many of you have heard of Empire. Why did we choose Empire? Well, because it is the most reliable and consistent tool. See, when you're teaching students that are new to a particular subject, you don't want to be troubleshooting tools or figuring out why something didn't work, or that exact command copy and pasted twice does 2 different things. That just brings a lot of headaches and pain, and we didn't want that. So we chose Empire. And right as we were turning in the course, we saw this message on Twitter by Chris, one of the developers of PowerShell Empire, pretty much stating that the project was reaching an end of life. And this made me sad. So went over to the SANS instructor Slack, because I couldn't really interact or talk to many people in the industry about what we're doing. And I asked there, hey, what C2 are you using? And Tim Medine is like, Sliver. Sliver's pretty good. And Jeff McJunkin is like, I'm really liking Covenant. And then someone's like, Merlin. And then I'm like, whoa. Not one person said the same answer. How many C2 frameworks are there? So I kind of started building a list in Excel, which is the most technical tool I know how to use. And then in September at the last DerbyCon, I had met Bryson, actually, ironically, at a SANS event, at an advisory board meeting, And we had lunch. I told him the various things. He asked, how's the class going? I said, good, I finished it. But we used Empire. And then that discussion started over what this little list of just a couple C2s could turn into.
Meanwhile, I was the last presentation at the last DerbyCon, and I mean last presentation, I was literally the last presentation scheduled, and my class, or my presentation was on adversarial emulation, because I really wanted to continue to push the evolution of today's red teaming from a very tool-centric monoculture to let's focus more on those TTPs and those behaviors. And wouldn't you know it, that not only are there a lot of different ones, they're all of a different variety of that you have to research on what they can do and how well they work. And that's, of course, after you even get over the burden of getting them installed. So I had struggled through that to put that presentation together.
Yeah, and as usual, you tried a live demo and live demos fail. Why do live demos fail? Because we're using these, beta type tools that might not be consistent. Like, it literally worked 2 minutes before the presentation. So we had that discussion and we said, let's evaluate this. And then that's when Adam came into the picture.
Yeah, and the idea for us was, well, not only there's this vast swath of different tools out there, varying different open source licenses and difficulties to install, but the idea of being able to wrap your head around them and figure out, well, which one of these serves a purpose for the thing I'm trying to do, not only as just from a red team operator standpoint, but if you're just trying to do some research on, well, what payloads are out there? Why is there no place that has this all collected? And here we are.
And here we are. And in November 2019, which was actually a year ago, believe it or not, we launched C2 Matrix. And the original goal here was to just choose the best modern replacement for Empire. One that is reliable, consistent, and user-friendly, and meets, some requirements that red teamers have, like being operationally secure, right? Like have some sort of encryption between your compromised host and your command and control server. Allow various channels. Although HTTP is probably the main channel, what if you wanted to try DNS or DNS over HTTPS or something else? Be able to create these for multiple systems, because as you all know, if you do any red teaming or pen testing, you don't just have Windows system environments. You have Mac, you have Linux, right? Sometimes we have mobile, right? And then be able to create custom profiles so that our outbound detections don't catch our tools. We want to measure response, but we don't want to get caught on the initial access. So things like domain fronting was something that we wanted to look at. I worked at an enterprise. These things obviously mattered from my side as well, and to other enterprises, such as like, is there proxy aware, right? Everyone in most enterprises is going out through a proxy. You should not be able to connect directly to the internet. At least that is a better practice, right? And then once you do gain this foothold, you do deploy your payload, you want to move laterally or pivot internally. And if you're running a red team, that T word, right, means you need multiple users. And how can you log and see what these users are doing? And of course, community involvement is always nice to have. So we thought of a consistent way of doing this, an evaluation lab. Something that would fit on a laptop. Back then we were actually traveling places, teaching and whatnot. So created through VMware Workstation, 3 subnets, 1 for internet access, 1 for the attacker's machines, and 1 for the victims, all separated with pfSense. This is all documented. So if you want to build a lab like this, you can do it yourself and you can test all of these things out. And then we had a few things we were looking at, right? I mentioned communication channels, but also the coding language. Like, is the server Python? Is it C? Is it C#? Is it .NET? Like, what is it? And then the implant. How are you creating the implant? Is it PowerShell? Is it Python, right? So all those things matter. The user interface matters, the implant, the capabilities and support. And as we started collaborating, I, again, was using Excel, given that I worked at a larger organization and didn't know that there were collaboration tools that allow you to actually collaborate real time. And then that's when Adam and Bryson are like, dude, we got to use Google Sheets. And that's where we started using Google Sheets. And this is a fairly recent snapshot. This is the golden source, right? It's an Excel, well, not an Excel, sorry. See, I'm still in this old mindset. It's a Google Sheet that anyone could contribute to it. You can add things to it. You can measure and go through these. And you see there who has contributed and who has worked on these various Google Sheets. And then, of course, the release at Hackfest was awesome. I think in the first month, we got 1,000 new Twitter followers, which was amazing. I mean, we started with a little spreadsheet and all of a sudden we had this. And you can visit this. You can go to the c2matrix.com right now. It's there. It's a pretty little GUI, but if you click on that matrix, that big red button on the top right, you're going to get a Google Sheet. So what has changed? Adam, you want to take this one?
Yeah, and it's been crazy to see the growth of the kinds of C2s that have appeared on this Google Sheet over time as the golden source. And obviously here in November 2019, we had 30. Then in June, we have 2020, we had 47. In November, we had 2020, we're up to 60. All of these things have this increase in C2s has come not only from us being better at finding them and people knowing about the C2 matrix and wanting to collaborate, but also there has been some discussion around and maybe there's some disagreements about it, but we are kind of in a bit of a golden age of C2 development where all these sorts of operators will have a very specific use case, and now they've got the means to research the ones that exist and build their own and can collaborate with the C2 matrix as a community and put their notes about the C2 they just made there. So we're seeing this extreme growth in the kinds of things we've seen over time. And of course, we've also added a number of different categories and the ability to interact with the website so you can kind of find the C2 you're looking for. Things like different C2s, whether or not things are mapped to MITRE, whether or not these C2s have been found in the wild by threat intel companies. Also how to collaborate with these various C2 developers. All of these things have been built out and made the Google Sheet, the golden master C2 matrix, just that much easier to use, that much easier to research with, and that much better from a data granularity perspective of saying, oh, if I want to develop something, or if I'm looking for a specific threat actor to try to emulate, where can I get started with what platform that already has the features that I'm looking for? So I don't necessarily have to build everything from scratch. And so this is a really great snapshot of the way the C2 matrix is developed in the short amount of time it's been around.
Yeah, and definitely a lot of contributors, right? Well, one of the things we did with Bryson is we went to, what was the conference? Art into Science, a conference on defense, and spoke to defenders.
Yeah, so that's a conference on defense. I mean, Jeff Moss, who of course everybody knows DT, along with Gadi Evron and a few others, put on this really small conference. And what I like about that conference is there's two tracks. There's a technical track and a philosophy track. And the philosophy is all talking about the art of this and how to think about the problems. And from there, we started to look at the defender perspective of them looking at it and saying, hey, you're tracking this from the offensive side of finding an easier way to create an evaluation and a decision matrix to understanding what C2s to be able to emulate the adversary. Meanwhile, we're here in enterprise environments actually trying to find these things because some of these C2s are in fact real world threats that we're seeing in the wild. And wouldn't it be great if we started including detections and signaturing and different ways so that there is now something for the blue team to automatically consume out of what I could call the largest compendium of offense that's ever been assembled.
Yep, and that used in the wild is a theme that we've seen quite a bit, right? I think anyone that's on InfoSec Twitter has seen the debates on offensive security tools, and this was one of the ways to track them, and we're going to talk about a few other methods there. The last one on this slide is how-to.thec2matrix.com. As we grew, we saw that it was actually challenging for newcomers coming in to start working with any of these command and control frameworks. So we created a good book where you can figure out how to run them, how to start the server, how to install it, how to set up listeners, create your payload, send them across, interact, etc. And again, all that is community contribution. So this part of the presentation, we're going to dive into various ones. We obviously can't talk about 60 different C2s and how they've changed, but the biggest ones we've seen. So one of them is Empire is back and fully supported by a company called BC Security. Empire does have a little Star Wars thing to it. So you can read the post is the Empire 3 strikes back. And that means that it is on Python 3. The original version of Empire was on Python 2. And there's new modules and they are updating this thing like all the time. We can't even keep up. I believe the latest version is 3.1, but maybe next week when you hear this recording, you realize that there's a newer version out. So that was a big one. We think this is probably one of the most popular C2s out there. Then we saw C3. This is custom command and control done by the folks at F-Secure. And they have a couple of contributions here. One is various different command and control channels, things like lateral movement through LDAP, which is pretty cool. They also are contributing and lowering the learning curve here by having their labs. They have a command and control and exfiltration lab where you can go through and use a variety of C2s and learn how this works. So thank you to you all and those contributions. And then, of course, Cobalt Strike, probably the most popular red team tool used by malicious actors today, right? We've seen a lot of changes in what has happened last year to Cobalt Strike. First, they were purchased by Help System. So congratulations to Ralphie and the team there. That's awesome. Love seeing people making it in the industry, right? They recently released version 4.2. So if you haven't checked that out, it's there. But we've also seen a significant number of malicious attacks leveraging Cobalt Strike. We've also seen a lot of voices and really the whole offensive security tool debate really hitting home on this because of that. And as you can see on the screenshot here as well, Cobalt Strike source leaked. Now, there's a lot of debate of this already having been leaked. I thought the net new here, because I don't hang out in these underground channels, was version 4.0. Being a newer version. And as you can see there, it just comments out the license requirement, meaning that malicious actors are not paying for this, they're grabbing it. And then of course, someone posted this on GitHub. It's been forked a cajillion times. And yes, that is an official number. You can read it on the top of the GitHub there. So that's kind of brought a bit onto the industry. And this led to a bunch of memes. In particular, Andrew Thompson likes posting this one here because as we've seen in a lot of ransomware attacks, the precursor to dropping that ransomware always seems to have Cobalt Strike at some point of the chain. So there you have your Toy Story memes. And then the ransomware operator starter pack that was also tweeted out. And again, more memes. This one, thanks to Jamie Geiger out there of the Spider-Man and talking there with Iron Man, right? Other things, Covenant version 0.6 is out, and this introduced something, and if you can't tell, it's a dark mode. Adam, what do you think about dark mode? Should we include this on the list? And this was an active debate on Twitter, and the answer was yes, but
Absolutely. And dark mode is one of those things that it really speaks to how mature the C2 world is getting, where it's not only about, well, which C2 protocols and how do you embed data and what kind of commands does it have? It's like, well, forget about it. Let's talk about the things that operators really care about, such as dark mode, which is, it's an accessibility feature. But the fact that we needed to add a does it support dark mode column to the C2 matrix just speaks to how much of a front and center piece of functionality things like usability have become, which is great because when the matrix was still getting started, it was all these things were tricky to deploy, very terminal based. I mean, these were highly technical tools. And now we're saying, well, I only want to use a C2 that has a web GUI and dark mode. You can make those sorts of selections now. And so even though it was kind of a funny argument of, do we have a does support dark mode column, it makes sense. And it speaks to the maturity of the entire C2 industry as a whole.
And of course, we had to cover Covenant because it's also one of the most popular. I think a lot of tracks go from coming from Metasploit world, right, where you do pen testing, then Empire with PowerShell testing that, right? If an organization is not catching PowerShell or Empire for that matter, then they have a lot of work to do. And then people are moving over to Covenant and then over to Mythic, which was a big one too. This was by Cody Thomas, and originally it was called AppFell, and as the name suggests, it was targeting Apple. And they had a blog post recently called "A Change of Mythic Proportions," and they've renamed AppFell now to Mythic to really take and be able to have agents and implants in various different languages against various different operating systems. And the way they did that is pretty interesting. I think it's worth mentioning here because I think this is where the frameworks are going to, as the whole modular piece of it. In this case, they containerized everything. That's one method of doing it, right? You can make modules in different ways. Of course, Empire does it with PowerShell scripts. But in this case, you can see they really decoupled everything, and you can create your own C2 profiles. You can create your own payload types. You can create your own connections and whatnot. So I think that this was an interesting point, something where we're seeing, and again, seeing Mythic getting pretty popular as well after Covenant, as far as we can see. And then there's a ton of others to keep an eye on, some that we've looked at personally, some that we haven't, some that have been contributed and reviewed by other people. You too can look at any of these and review them. These are just the ones that look like they have a nice user base, or they're created by folks that are known in the industry to do some pretty cool things with C2. So keep your eyes on that. And then there is Baby Shark there. And the only reason I included Baby Shark, because it was only a proof of concept, is so that I can sing Baby Shark, do, 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 Baby Shark, do, 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 do. I don't know if it's going to be maintained, but it has a nice little POC and, of course, a nice little jingle that will now be stuck on your head for the rest of the day. You're welcome. The other things we saw, we had Chris Trunser from 40 North Security. If you haven't heard of them, definitely give him a follow. Very, very bright, has a lot of tools out there. He came over to Hackfest West that we ran and gave a talk about using Azure for command and control. And of course, you can use Azure as a computing environment, but you can also use Azure's CDN capabilities, content delivery network capabilities, for domain fronting through Microsoft CDN, Verizon, and Akamai, which is fantastic. But really the net new, I think, from this talk was the ability to use Azure functions. This is serverless code, right? The equivalent of this for you AWS fans would be Lambda functions. And the cool and neat thing about this that I took away, and of course, definitely check out the entire GitHub, but is that you can actually use Azure websites.net subdomains for your C2. And do you know anyone that blocks Azure or Azure websites.net? Probably not. So from a red team perspective, we're seeing this as a method of not getting caught on command and control. And then Red Elk. Red Elk isn't really a C2. However, it is definitely a red team tool that facilitates how your red team operates. And they also have an awesome graphic, the one you see here. So shout out to Mark Smee and the folks at Outflank. This is an Elk stack, an elastic stack, because they keep changing the name on us, that ingests a number of logs. Because when you run red team operations, you're not just running one C2 server, you might have 3 or 5 C2 servers. And then you have redirectors. So wouldn't it be cool if you could take all the logs from all of that and having one central place that you can look at, have your white cell look at that so that you can deconflict to verify what's red team traffic and what's not? Or if you're a red team manager, I ran a 12-person red team at a global organization. Going C2 server by C2 server is not the ideal to track work. So awesome tool that's available for when you deploy. Recent versions are adding things like threat hunting. So, really seeing the development of this has been awesome. And it does cover a little bit of C2 stuff. So we put it in here. And then we saw sponsorware. Marcello, our friend over there, who's not Adam Mashinchi, although they look very similar. He does a lot of projects. I don't know, Adam, if you know how many projects he has. Every time I try to count, I don't have enough fingers to do it. But pretty much what he did here is he said, and he's the creator of Silent Trinity, by the way. So it's one of the C2s. I guess I should start by that. But a bunch of other tools too. He said, look, I'm spending a ton of free time on this. He does work full-time at Black Hills. Obviously, he does some work for them there. But he said, I'm going to make it sponsorware. And sponsorware means that you need to get a certain sponsor level. That means you go on GitHub and you pay And then once you reach a certain level, certain people get access. And when you reach another level, then everyone gets access. And you can see this had quite a bit of likes, really changing how the industry is going, and probably worth mentioning here. BC Security jumped on that as well, even giving a shout out to Marcello on what they're doing, because at the end of the day, these takes a lot of time. And if you don't know what I mean, check out any of these C2s, GitHub issues, and yeah. And then IST map, you want to cover this one, Adam? I know you spoke with Paul a bit on this, and it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and given that we only have about 5 minutes left, really the long and the short of this is there's really fascinating ways that some of these payloads and threat actors and different techniques that they're using are being aggregated and categorized together. And whether it's by looking at the way that the binaries are compiled or the kind of behaviors that they utilize, there's a lot of great intel organizations trying to map these together, both from a tooling and from a threat actor perspective. And the IST map is one example of that, where someone has said, hey, we know that there's all these C2s out there. Are there any common threads between them, whether based on who's utilizing them or how the technology works? And this is one of a very cool project that visualizes that into this OST map. So highly recommend folks take a look.
And then just some other C2 matrix stuff. We're obviously hearing about it here at Blackhat. We went to Blackhat USA for the first time, and that was amazing. We ran a CTF. So we ran a conference. We ran a number of conferences this year, right? GrimCon, Unicon, Purple Team Summit, right? All just a part of our DNA to give back to the community. But this particular one, we ran a CTF. And the theory was that a lot of red teamers don't know what their payloads do. Like they'll create a payload on Empire or Posh or any of these C2s and not actually know what it does. So I had an idea, and I went over to the SANS folks, to Ed Scotus, who runs CounterHack, and definitely check out Holiday Hack Challenge, and said, hey, has anyone ever put a C2 on the internet and created payloads and had people run them on their machines to see what would happen? And everyone's like, no, that you think people would do that? I don't know. You're going to stand this up on the internet? What could go wrong? I don't know. So got some money, got some DigitalOcean servers up, nice and powerful ones, and set these up, just vanilla C2s, created a bunch of payloads, used the NetWars game engine, and then asked people to run these 3 different payloads on their own machine to tell us what it was doing. And we got 457 agents calling back to one C2 server at a particular time, which was amazing. Speaking with all these developers, particularly the Empire and the Posh C2, they had never had more than like 30 agents at a time. So we exceeded that by a lot. There's a link there if you want to read more about these challenges and how it was. We were also on the Operator Handbook. Many of you have heard about this. If not, it's a fairly new book. It's out there, so love seeing someone take a picture, literally pointing, look, command and control research, C2 matrix, I know you.
You thought it would be cool to set our birthday on the Twitter. And I said, I guess that'd be cool. And then you did it. And then because we weren't 13, we got locked out of Twitter right before a conference. So that was fun. Yeah, I remember that. And then Bryson gave the look he's giving right now because of that. So
yeah, that was fun. And then Ed Scotus wrote us for a keynote at Hackfest West. He does the Holiday Hack Challenge. Definitely, like, that's starting, I think, now. By the time you hear this, it started. It's KringleCon 3, French hens. So he created the H2 matrix, which if you want to learn something, say you want to learn PowerShell, you go in and you look, and it points you to the challenges along with walkthroughs on how to learn these things. So fantastic there. Oh yeah, one last thing. We have a Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition. This is a virtual machine that we've created for you to get started. This was in collaboration with SANS and Ryan O'Grady. The goal is to lower the learning curve of installing these C2s so you can get right to testing. We just released, like right now, you're seeing it now for the first time, a brand new version. It has 8 C2s installed, and it has vector for managing and tracking exercises.
Yeah, so this is where it's not just the 3 fools you see on the TV in front of you. It is, in fact, you. So we started with something. You heard the origin story of how George and I both came across an individual problem as part of our research, and here we are, 60 C2s and counting later. The three people here do not even come close to doing all of that work. This is a community project. We need folks engaged to constantly be evaluating and updating. We need folks to be engaged to be looking at what additional things we need to be measuring and what's the state of the art there. We need folks to be engaged to also help expand the roadmap of making this more useful, particularly on the defensive side. One of the biggest things that we'd like to hear on how to update requests and all that. So this is a community effort to make this a useful tool. I'd say that one of the biggest things that we're still out there is creating a full-time C2 range, so that folks can actually have a common place where the previous lab that George put up earlier, that's already there for everybody to be able to use for the evaluation, the testing, as well as starting to expand additional things like training and education off of it.